The morning sun painted the steel and glass building in shades of amber and gold. Sterling Enterprises stood like a monument in the heart of downtown, 50 floors of architectural precision that seemed to touch the clouds themselves. Grace Winters stood at the entrance, her worn portfolio clutched against her chest, heart hammering with equal parts hope and anxiety. This job meant everything. It was more than employment. It was a chance to disappear into normalcy, to build a life where her past could not find her. She straightened her shoulders, smoothed down her simple navy dress, and stepped through the revolving doors into a world that smelled of expensive coffee and quiet ambition. The lobby greeted her with marble floors that reflected the chandeliers above. Everything gleamed with the kind of perfection that made her acutely aware of her second-hand shoes and the small repair on her bag strap. But Grace had learned long ago that dignity was not measured in price tags. She held her head high as she approached the reception desk. A kind-faced woman in her 50s looked up with a warm smile. "You must be Grace Winters. Welcome to Sterling Enterprises. I am Helen Morrison, the office manager. Mr. Sterling is expecting you on the 48th floor." Grace felt her stomach tighten. She had researched Vincent Sterling extensively before accepting this position. The internet painted him as a genius in real estate development, a self-made billionaire who had transformed the city skyline. But the articles also mentioned his reputation for being impossible to work with, cold and demanding, with assistants rarely lasting more than 6 months. The man behind the desk, the elevator ride felt endless. Grace watched the numbers climb, each floor bringing her closer to a man who seemed more legend than human. When the doors finally opened, she stepped into a space that took her breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around the entire level, offering a view of the city that made her feel like she was standing on top of the world. Helen guided her through a corridor lined with abstract art and polished wood. The silence here was different from downstairs. It was heavier, more intentional, as if sound itself had been carefully controlled. "Mr. Sterling values 3 things above all else," Helen said quietly as they walked. "Punctuality, discretion, and results. If you can provide those, you will do well here." "And if I cannot?" Grace asked, though she already knew the answer. Helen paused at a large oak door. "Then you will join the long list of people who tried and failed. But I have a feeling about you, Grace. Something tells me you are different." Before Grace could respond, Helen knocked twice and opened the door. The office beyond was enormous, yet somehow felt intimate. Dark wood bookshelves lined one wall, filled with volumes on architecture, business, and philosophy. A massive desk sat before the windows, and behind it stood Vincent Sterling. He was not what she expected. Grace had seen photographs, but they had not captured the presence of the man. He was tall, with dark hair touched by silver at the temples, wearing a charcoal suit that fit him like it had been designed specifically for his frame. But it was his eyes that struck her most. They were gray like storm clouds, beautiful and distant, holding a coldness that seemed to keep the entire world at arm's length. "Mr. Sterling," Helen said gently, "this is Grace Winters, your new executive assistant." Vincent's gaze moved to Grace, assessing her with the precision of someone who had learned to read people as a matter of survival. He did not smile. He did not extend his hand. He simply nodded once. "Miss Winters," his voice was low and controlled. "Please sit." Grace moved to the chair across from his desk, her movements careful and measured. She could feel his eyes on her, noting every detail. This was a man who missed nothing, who had built walls so high that sunlight barely reached him anymore. "The rules of engagement. Your primary responsibility will be managing my schedule and correspondence," Vincent began without preamble. "I expect all communications to be filtered through you. No unexpected visitors, no personal calls, no deviation from established protocols. Is that understood?" "Yes, sir," Grace replied, her voice steady despite the nervous energy thrumming through her veins. "I do not tolerate incompetence, inefficiency, or dishonesty." Vincent's fingers drummed once against the desk, a rare display of movement. "Your predecessor lasted 3 weeks before she proved unsuitable for the position. I trust you will demonstrate better judgment." "I will do my best, Mr. Sterling." Something flickered in his expression at those words, too quick to identify but real nonetheless. He opened a leather folder and slid it across the desk toward her. "These are the accounts and projects requiring immediate attention. Familiarize yourself with them by tomorrow morning. We have a board meeting at 8. Grace reached for the folder, careful not to let her fingers tremble. As she pulled it toward her, Vincent's hand moved to pass her a pen, and for the briefest moment, their fingers brushed against each other. The reaction was immediate. Vincent pulled back as if burned, his jaw tightening, his entire body going rigid. Grace froze, uncertain what had just happened. In that split second, she had felt the warmth of his skin, and she could have sworn she felt him flinch not from pain, but from something deeper, something that looked almost like fear. "I apologize," Grace said quickly, pulling her hand back. Vincent stood abruptly, turning toward the window, his back to her. His shoulders were tense, his hands clasped behind him with white-knuckled force. "Helen will show you to your desk. That will be all for now." Grace rose slowly, confused and concerned. She glanced at Helen, who gave her a small, sad smile that seemed to say this was normal. This was simply who Vincent Sterling had become. The story behind the ice that evening. After most of the staff had gone home, Grace found herself still at her new desk, reviewing the mountain of files Vincent had given her. Through the glass partition, she could see him in his office, still working, the city lights creating a halo around his silhouette. Helen appeared with 2 cups of coffee, setting one on Grace's desk before settling into the chair beside her. "You handled that well," she said softly. "Better than most. I do not understand what happened," Grace admitted. "When I touched his hand, he looked at me like I had done something terrible." Helen sighed, her eyes drifting to Vincent's office. 5 years ago, Vincent was a different man. He laughed, he trusted, he believed in people. He had a business partner named Robert, someone he considered a brother. They built this company together from nothing. Grace listened, her coffee forgotten as Helen's voice took on a heavier tone. Vincent was also engaged to a woman named Caroline. She was beautiful, ambitious, everything he thought he wanted. But what he did not know was that Caroline and Robert had been having an affair for over a year. They were planning to steal the company from under him, to use his trust against him. "How did he find out?" Grace whispered. "He walked in on them," Helen said quietly. "In his own office, on the eve of what should have been his wedding day. They had been planning to drain the company accounts and disappear together. Robert had already sold company secrets to their competitors. It nearly destroyed everything Vincent had built." Grace felt her heart constrict. "And since then, he has not trusted anyone, not a soul," Helen confirmed. "He rebuilt the company alone, but something inside him broke that day. He will not let anyone close. He will not even shake hands. Every relationship is kept at a careful distance. It is not cruelty, Grace. It is survival." As Helen left, Grace looked again at Vincent's office. She understood now why his eyes held such coldness, why every word was measured, every gesture controlled. He had built a fortress around his heart, and he intended to live there forever. But Grace knew something about fortresses. She knew they were built not just to keep people out, but to trap the person inside. And as she watched Vincent standing alone against the city lights, she made a quiet promise to herself. She would not try to tear down his walls, but perhaps with patience and kindness, she could show him that not everyone beyond them meant him harm. Perhaps she could help him see that trust, once broken, could still be rebuilt. What Grace did not yet know was that she carried her own dangerous secrets, and soon both of them would have to decide if the risk of trusting was worth the possibility of love. 3 weeks passed like quiet snow falling on glass. Grace learned the rhythm of Vincent Sterling's world with careful attention. She arrived each morning before dawn, when the city was still wrapped in darkness and the office held a sacred stillness. She prepared his schedule, organized his files, and placed his coffee at precisely the right temperature on the corner of his desk. Vincent remained distant, but Grace noticed subtle changes. He no longer flinched quite as sharply when she entered the room. Sometimes, when she brought him documents, his eyes would linger on her face for a heartbeat longer than necessary. And once, just once, She caught the ghost of a smile when she made a small joke about the weather. These moments were tiny, fragile as spider silk, but they mattered. They were proof that beneath the ice, something human still lived. One morning, Grace arrived to find Vincent already at his desk, staring at a set of blueprints with such intensity that he did not notice her enter. She paused in the doorway, observing him. His hair was slightly disheveled, his tie loosened. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. He had been there all night. "Mr. Sterling," she said softly, not wanting to startle him. He looked up, and for a moment, his guard was down. She saw exhaustion there and something else. Loneliness, perhaps, or the weight of carrying an empire on shoulders that had forgotten how to share the burden. "Miss Winters," he said, straightening slightly. "I did not realize the time." "It is 6:30, she replied gently. "Have you been here all night?" He hesitated, then nodded once. "There is a project deadline. I needed to review the structural plans." Grace set down her bag and moved to his coffee station without asking permission. She prepared his coffee exactly as he liked it, the familiar ritual calming her nerves. When she placed it on his desk, she made sure to keep a careful distance. "You cannot build empires if you forget to rest," she said simply. Vincent looked at her with those storm-gray eyes, and something shifted in his expression. It was so subtle that anyone else might have missed it. But Grace saw it, a softening, a crack in the armor. "Is that advice or criticism?" he asked, but there was no edge to his voice. "It is concern," she answered honestly, from someone who understands what it means to carry heavy things alone. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. The morning light was beginning to paint the windows gold, and in that gentle illumination, Vincent Sterling looked less like an untouchable billionaire and more like a man who had forgotten what it felt like to be cared for. The crisis that changes. Everything the sea. Following week brought a storm that would test everything. Grace was organizing files when Helen rushed into her office, her usually calm face tight with worry. "Grace, we have a serious problem. The Peterson deal is falling apart. Someone leaked confidential information to their competitors. The board is meeting in an hour, and they are blaming Mr. Sterling." Grace felt her blood run cold. The Peterson deal was worth millions. It was the kind of contract that could elevate Sterling Enterprises to new heights, or, if lost, damage Vincent's reputation significantly. What information was leaked? Grace asked quickly. Financial projections and negotiation strategies. Only 5 people had access to those files. Helen's voice dropped. "The board members are suggesting it came from Vincent's office." The implication was clear. They were questioning Vincent's judgment, his security, perhaps even his integrity. Grace knew what this would do to him. After being betrayed by Robert, any suggestion of disloyalty cut deeper than most people could understand. "Where is Mr. Sterling now?" Grace asked. "In the conference room." "Grace, they are going to ask him to step back from the negotiations. Some are even suggesting a vote of no confidence." Grace stood immediately, her mind racing. "Show me the access logs for those files. Every entry, every timestamp." For the next 45 minutes, Grace worked with a focus she had not felt since her old life, the life she was trying to forget. She cross-referenced server logs, email timestamps, and security footage. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, her training kicking in despite her best efforts to bury that part of herself. And then she found it. The breach had not come from Vincent's office at all. It had come from the account of a board member named Preston Howard, who had accessed the files remotely 3 days before the leak. But the access pattern was wrong, too systematic, too fast. Someone with technical knowledge had used his credentials. Grace printed everything, organized it into a clear presentation, and walked straight to the conference room. Her heart pounded as she knocked on the door, interrupting what sounded like a heated argument. Vincent's voice came through, sharp and controlled. Not now. Grace opened the door anyway. 12 pairs of eyes turned to her, some annoyed, others curious. Vincent sat at the head of the table, his face a mask of cold fury, but she could see the pain beneath it. "I apologize for the interruption," Grace said clearly, "but I have information regarding the leak that you need to see immediately." "Miss Winters, this is a closed board meeting," Preston Howard said sharply. "You have no authority to be here." Grace walked directly to Vincent, placing the folder in front of him. She leaned down slightly, her voice low enough that only he could hear. "Trust me." His eyes met hers, searching, questioning. Then he nodded once and opened the folder. As Vincent reviewed the documents, Grace addressed the board. The leak did not come from Mr. Sterling's office. It came from an external breach using Mr. Howard's credentials 3 days ago at 2:15 in the morning. "That is impossible," Preston sputtered. "I was not even online at that time." "Exactly," Grace said calmly. "Someone used your account remotely. The access pattern suggests professional hacking. I have already contacted our security team and the authorities. The breach has been traced to a competitor who has a history of corporate espionage." The room fell silent. Vincent looked up from the documents, his expression unreadable, but his eyes held something new when they found Grace. Respect, perhaps, or the beginning of trust. Shadows and secrets. That evening, Vincent asked Grace to stay after everyone else had left. She found him by the windows, the city lights reflecting in the glass like scattered stars. "Thank you," he said without turning around. "What you did today went beyond your job description." "I did what was right," Grace replied simply. He turned to face her then, and in the dim light, he looked younger somehow. Less guarded. "How did you find the breach so quickly?" "That level of analysis requires specialized knowledge." Grace felt her chest tighten. This was dangerous territory. "I used to work in data security," she said carefully, "before I came here." It was not quite a lie, but it was not the full truth either. She had worked in data security, but not in the way Vincent imagined. She had been part of something much darker, something that had forced her to disappear and rebuild her life from nothing. Vincent studied her face, and she wondered if he could see the secret she carried. But instead of pressing, he simply nodded. "I have not trusted anyone in 5 years," he said quietly. "But today, you gave me a reason to reconsider that decision." Grace's heart stumbled in her chest. "Mr. Sterling—" "Vincent," he corrected gently. "When we are alone, you can call me Vincent." She smiled softly. Vincent. They stood there in the quiet, two people carrying their own wounds, their own secrets. The distance between them felt smaller now, though neither dared to close it completely. Grace's phone buzzed in her pocket, sharp and insistent. She glanced at it and felt her blood turn cold. Unknown number. "Third call this week." She rejected it quickly, but not before Vincent noticed the fear that flashed across her face. "Is everything all right?" he asked, concern threading through his voice. "Yes," she lied, forcing a smile. "Just a spam call." But as she left the office that night, Grace felt the weight of her past pressing closer. She had built a new life here, had started to believe she could be safe. But the calls were getting more frequent, and she knew what they meant. Someone had found her. And soon she would have to choose between running again or trusting Vincent with the truth that could destroy everything they were beginning to build. In his office, Vincent watched Grace leave, seeing the tension in her shoulders, the way she glanced over her shoulder as she entered the elevator. He had spent 5 years reading people, protecting himself from betrayal. And what he saw in Grace Winters was fear. She was hiding something significant. And despite every instinct telling him to maintain his distance, Vincent found himself wanting to know what shadows chased her. More than that, he found himself wanting to protect her from them. The call came on a Tuesday morning, shattering the fragile peace Grace had built. She was at her desk, reviewing contracts, when her personal phone vibrated with a number she recognized. Her hands shook as she answered, stepping quickly into an empty conference room. Grace Winters, the voice on the other end was professional but urgent. "This is Marshal Catherine Blake. We have a situation. They found you. Grace's legs nearly gave out." She gripped the edge of the table, her vision swimming. "How, we are not certain yet. But there has been activity in your area. Someone asking questions about a woman matching your description. You need to prepare to move. We can have you relocated by tomorrow." "No," Grace whispered. "Please, I cannot leave." "Not now, Grace, you know the protocol. Your safety is paramount. These people will not stop until they silence you. The trial is in 6 weeks. We cannot risk losing our witness." "Give me 24 hours," Grace pleaded. Please, I need to handle something first. 24 hours. The marshal agreed reluctantly. Then we move you whether you are ready or not. When Grace returned to her desk, her face was pale, her hands trembling. She tried to focus on work, but the words blurred on the screen. Everything she had built here, the safety, the routine, the connection with Vincent, it was all about to disappear. Through the glass partition, Vincent watched her. He saw the fear, the way she kept glancing at her phone, the tears she blinked back when she thought no one was looking. Something was very wrong. "Miss Winters," his voice came through the intercom. "Please come to my office." Grace stood on unsteady legs and walked into his office. Vincent was standing by the window, his back to her, hands clasped behind him. The city stretched below them, indifferent to human suffering. "Close the door," he said quietly. She did, her heart hammering so hard she could barely breathe. Vincent turned to face her, and his eyes held an intensity that made her want to both run and stay. "I have spent 5 years reading people, understanding when they are lying, when they are hiding something. And you, Grace Winters, are terrified of something." Tears welled in her eyes despite her best efforts. "I am sorry." "No," he said, stepping closer but maintaining the careful distance he always kept. "Do not apologize. Tell me the truth. Whatever is happening, whatever you are running from, let me help you." "You cannot help me with this," Grace whispered, her voice breaking. "No one can. Try me." And in that moment, looking into his storm-gray eyes, Grace made a decision that would change everything. She chose trust over fear. "The confession, my real name is Grace Winters," she began, her voice soft but steady. "But that is not the name I was born with. 3 years ago, I was working as a data analyst for a financial firm in Boston. What I did not know was that the firm was a front for money laundering. They were moving millions for a criminal organization." Vincent listened without interruption, his face unreadable. "When I discovered what was happening, I went to the authorities. I agreed to testify to provide evidence that would bring down the entire network. But these are dangerous people, Vincent. They have resources, connections. The night before I was supposed to enter witness protection, they tried to kill me." Her voice cracked, remembering the terror of that night. "My younger brother Thomas was with me. He was only 16. They shot at us, chased us through the streets. We barely made it to the safe house alive." "Where is your brother now?" Vincent asked, gently. "Safe. In a different location under a different name. We have not been allowed contact since we entered the program. It is safer that way, and you have been running ever since." Grace nodded. "I have had 4 different identities in 3 years. 4 different cities, 4 different lives. Every time I start to feel safe, they find me, and I have to disappear again. But here, in this job, working for you, I let myself believe I could finally stop running." The tears came then, streaming down her face. "I let myself believe I could have something real, and now they have found me again and I have to leave. Tomorrow the marshals are relocating me. I will disappear, and you will never hear from me again." Vincent stood very still, processing everything she had told him. Grace watched his face, waiting for the anger, the betrayal, the accusation that she had lied to him. She had given him every reason to turn away, to prove that his walls were justified. Instead, he did something that shocked her. He removed his gloves. Slowly, deliberately, Vincent pulled off the thin leather gloves he always wore, setting them on his desk. His hands were bare, vulnerable. Then he walked toward her, closing the distance between them for the first time since they had met. "I spent 5 years believing that trust would only bring pain," he said quietly. "I built walls so high that I forgot what it felt like to be human. But you, Grace, you showed me something I thought I had lost forever." "Vincent, I am so sorry. I never meant to." He reached out, and with infinite gentleness, he took her hand in his. The touch was electric, warm, real. Grace gasped softly, seeing the emotion in his eyes. "You showed me that not everyone is Robert," he said. "Not everyone will betray me. And now I am going to show you that you do not have to run anymore. When danger arrives, what happened next came fast." That evening, As Grace was packing her few belongings in her small apartment, Vincent was making calls. He contacted his head of security, a former federal agent named James Warren. He reached out to lawyers, private investigators, people with connections in places that mattered. By midnight, Vincent had assembled a team. And he had a plan. The danger arrived the next morning. Grace was at the office early, preparing to say a silent goodbye to the place that had become her sanctuary. She was filing her last reports when Helen rushed in, her face white with fear. "Grace, there are 2 men in the lobby asking for you. They do not look like they are here for business." Grace's blood turned to ice. They had found her. Not just found her location, but had come directly to Sterling Enterprises. They were making a statement. Nowhere was safe. She grabbed her phone to call the marshals, but Vincent appeared in the doorway, his expression calm but his eyes fierce with determination. "Come with me," he said, extending his hand. "Vincent, you need to stay away from this. These people are dangerous. I know exactly how dangerous they are," he replied, "which is why I am not letting you face them alone." Grace took his hand, feeling the strength in his grip. Together, they moved quickly through a private corridor that led to Vincent's secure elevator, the one reserved for emergencies. But before they could reach it, 2 men rounded the corner. They were large, professional, with the cold eyes of people who had done terrible things for money. The taller one smiled, but it held no warmth. "Miss Winters," he said smoothly, "you have been very difficult to find. Our employer is disappointed that you missed your previous appointments." "Leave now," Vincent said, his voice low and commanding, "and I will not call the authorities." The man laughed. "Mr. Sterling, this does not concern you. Step aside, and you can go back to your comfortable life." What happened next unfolded in seconds. The man reached into his jacket. But before he could pull out whatever weapon he carried, James Warren and 3 security guards appeared from behind them. At the same time, police officers entered from the main corridor. Weapons drawn. "You are under arrest," the lead officer announced, "for attempted murder, witness intimidation, and breaking the terms of a restraining order." As the men were handcuffed and led away, Grace stood trembling, unable to process what had just happened. Vincent kept his hand in hers, steady and warm. The promise of tomorrow. Later, in the quiet of Vincent's office, Grace learned what he had done. Working through the night, Vincent had contacted the U.S. Marshals Service and the FBI. Using his connections and resources, he had arranged for increased protection and expedited the trial date. More importantly, he had hired the best security team in the country to ensure Grace's safety. The marshals explained that with the arrest of these 2 enforcers, they had gained crucial evidence that would strengthen Grace's testimony. The trial could now proceed within 2 weeks instead of 6, and after that, if all went well, Grace would finally be free. "You did all this for me," Grace whispered, sitting across from Vincent as the afternoon sun painted the office in gold. "I did it because running is not living," Vincent replied, "and because you taught me something important. Trust is not about being certain you will not get hurt. It is about believing that some people are worth the risk." Tears streamed down Grace's face, but they were different tears now. Not fear, but relief. Not despair, but hope. Vincent reached across the desk, his bare hand open, offering. "For 5 years, I lived behind walls. I thought I was protecting myself, but I was only ensuring my own loneliness. You changed that, Grace. You showed me that even broken hearts can learn to trust again." Grace placed her hand in his, feeling the warmth of his skin, the gentle strength in his fingers. "And you showed me that I do not have to carry my burdens alone. That safety can be found not in running, but in trusting the right person." They sat together as the city lights began to glow in the gathering dusk. Outside, the world continued its endless motion. But inside this tower of glass and steel, 2 wounded souls had found something precious. Epilogue. 6 months later. The trial had ended with convictions. Grace testified with courage, and the criminal organization was dismantled. Her brother Thomas was able to leave witness protection, and they reunited in a tearful embrace that healed years of forced separation. Grace Winters kept her name, her identity, finally her own, to claim. She continued working at Sterling Enterprises, though Vincent insisted on promoting her to Director of Operations. She earned it not through his favor, but through her skill and dedication. Vincent Sterling learned to live beyond his walls. He still had his routines, his need for order, but he also learned to laugh again, to trust again, to love. On a quiet evening, standing before the same windows where Grace had first seen him isolated and alone, Vincent took her hand. They watched the city together, two people who had learned that the greatest strength is not in building walls, but in having the courage to let them fall. Because sometimes the most dangerous secret is not the one we keep from others, but the one we keep from ourselves. That we are stronger together than we ever could be alone. That trust, once shattered, can be rebuilt into something even more beautiful. And that love, real love, is not about finding someone perfect. It is about finding someone brave enough to be imperfect with you. As Grace leaned her head against Vincent's shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her, both of them finally at peace, they understood a simple truth. The fortress of solitude had become a home built for two, and the man who never trusted anyone had found the one person worthy of his whole heart. The end.